11 days before Christmas, on the 15th of December 1900, the light from the lighthouse on Eilean Mor suddenly went out. The lighthouse was manned by 3 men: James Ducat, Donald McArthur, and Thomas Marshall. But when Joseph Moore, a replacement lighthouse keeper, landed on the island to investigate, there was no sign of any of the 3 men. Join us as we discuss one of the most unsettling and mysterious disappearances in maritime history. It was the 26th of December 1900, and Captain James Harvey was in charge of the ship carrying Joseph Moore, a replacement lighthouse keeper. The first sign something was wrong was when there was no one waiting for their arrival when they reached the landing platform. Captain Harvey then sounded his horn and sent up a flare to attract attention, but there was no response. Joseph Moore rowed to the island and walked to the closed entrance gate to the lighthouse and called out to the men. But the only sounds he heard in reply were the dying whispers of the receding storm and waves breaking on the shoreline. He knew the men well. Their families lived together on the shore station of Brestlet-on-Lewis. That morning, Moore had been so anxious that he was unable to eat breakfast. He felt overcome with an overwhelming sense of ominous portent when he looked up and saw 3 large blackbirds perched atop the lighthouse and fly out to sea and disappear. When he reached the lighthouse, he took a deep breath to steady his heart, which was now beating out of his chest, and immediately noticed that something was wrong. The door to the lighthouse was unlocked, and in the entrance hall, 2 of the 3 oilskinned coats were missing. The anxiety he was feeling was now replaced with a deep sense of fear, confusion, and foreboding as he walked through the lighthouse. The lighthouse was in perfect order. Nothing was out of place. The beds were made, and there were oil in the lamps. The plates, cups, and cutlery in the kitchen were washed and neatly stacked away. Everything was as it should be. The only thing that was out of place was that the clock in the kitchen had stopped working, and there were cold ashes in the fireplace. There was absolutely no sign of the men. Moore ran back to the ship and told Captain Harvey, who subsequently ordered a search of the island and found that the west landing had shown significant signs of storm damage, but the men were never found. It was as if the men had completed their basic duties for the day and simply vanished. So how can we explain the disappearance of the 3 lighthouse keepers on Eilean Mor? There have been a number of theories regarding the fates of the missing men. The first was proposed by Robert Muirhead, the Northern Lighthouse Board superintendent, who personally visited the island to investigate the disappearance. He arrived on the 29th of December, 3 days after the lighthouse keepers were officially reported missing. He had a vested interest in the case, as he had known and personally recruited all 3 of the missing men. Muirhead concluded that while the men were working on the west landing on the 15th of December, a large swell had washed all 3 men away and pointed to the damage on the west landing as evidence of this. This became the official explanation, but it raised more questions than answers. If the men had been overcome by a sudden and large swell, why hadn't at least one of the bodies been washed ashore? It also doesn't explain why one of the men didn't take his coat to be working on the exposed west platform in the bitterly cold month of December. And how could 3 experienced lighthouse keepers be taken completely unaware by a large wave? But perhaps the biggest problem with this theory is that the weather on the 15th of December, the day the light in the lighthouse went out, was calm, and the storms didn't hit the island until the 17th of December. While Moorhead may have been referring to a rogue wave, which is the sudden appearance of a large wave even in calm waters, rogue waves weren't recognised as a phenomena until 1995. Additionally, lighthouse regulations state that one person should remain in the lighthouse at all times, and these regulations appear to have been followed, as one coat was still hanging inside. So for the rogue wave theory to work, you would need one rogue wave to wash away two of the men, and the third man to rush down without his coat and be struck by a second rogue wave. The incidents of rogue waves hitting land are incredibly rare, and the chances of two rogue waves or more hitting land are virtually impossible, especially in calm weather. A similar theory is that Ducat and Marshall were trying to secure their equipment during a storm and were swept away as a result. McArthur then would have rushed down to help the two men, and he too would have been caught in the storm and washed away. But this encounters the same problems as the theory put forward by Moorhead, namely that there were no storms on any of the days that the men could have disappeared. So if it wasn't a storm or a rogue wave, what else could explain their disappearance? There were rumours that perhaps a fight had broken out due to drink, madness, or a combination of the two. Allegedly, William McArthur had a history of violence, and a fight broke out that resulted in all three men falling into the sea. Or perhaps McArthur murdered the other two men and disposed of the bodies before committing suicide by jumping into the sea himself. The problem with this theory is that there was no sign of a struggle in the lighthouse and no evidence of violence. Additionally, according to Moorhead, the oilskin left behind belonged to McArthur. This seems to suggest that McArthur wasn't even outside when whatever happened to the other two men occurred. The theory of three lighthouse keepers going mad became popularised by the supposed discovery of log entries, which seemed to indicate the gradual descent into madness in the form of entries that made no sense. An entry on the 12th of December writes of severe winds, the likes of which the diary entrant had never seen before, and that third assistant, William McArthur, had been crying and prayed for the storm to pass. And the final log entry, made on the 15th of December, the day the light in the lighthouse went out, simply read, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." As the storms didn't hit until after the 15th of December, this seemed to show that whoever was writing the entries had lost touch with reality, or that the men were experiencing something paranormal. The log entries, however, were later shown to be fictional and added to embellish the story over time. It's interesting to note that for centuries the island of Eilean Mor was uninhabited, and locals refused to stay overnight, fearing the spirits they believed haunted the island, as well as little folk such as fairies, who were believed to have the power to abduct and magically transport people into their realm. The lighthouse was constructed in December 1899, and the men disappeared in December 1900, almost exactly 1 year later. Is this just a coincidence, or were supernatural forces truly at work? For all the conjecture, there is one terrifying certainty. At some point in December, in the year 1900, something happened on the island of Eilean Mor, which caused 3 grown men to vanish without trace. Whatever caused the disappearance of the lighthouse keepers of Eilean Mor is likely to remain Unexplained. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to like, share and subscribe. It really does make such a difference to small channels like these. And if you've made it this far, thank you very much for listening.